This video goes over Lesson 10.1 on solid geometry. The two essential questions that we'll answer today are how do you classify three-dimensional figures, and how do you use nets and cross-sections to analyze three-dimensional figures? Three-dimensional figures, also called solids, can be made up of either flat or curved surfaces. A face is each of the flat surfaces in our 3D figure. A face will always be a polygon. You can see in the diagrams that we have here, this face shaded in blue is a rectangle, and this face shaded in blue is a triangle. A face can be any polygon. There's also more than one face. These are just two examples that are shaded. An edge is going to be a segment that is the intersection of two faces. Edges are always a segment, so when we name a segment, we name it with the segment symbol and then two letters. I'm going to mark just a couple examples of edges. So we have this edge here, but again, there are many edges. That's another edge there. This is an edge. This is an edge. So there are a lot of different edges in the figures. And then finally, we have a vertex. And a vertex is a point that is the intersection of three or more faces. So an example of a vertex would be this point here, but there are many other vertices as well. There's a vertice there, a vertice there. Here's a vertice. So a vertex is going to be a point where three or more faces come together. The edge is a segment where two faces come together. And a face is one of the flat polygonal surfaces of our three-dimensional solid. There are three different types of geometric solids that we're going to be studying in this class. We have prisms, cylinders, pyramids, and cones. A prism is a three-dimensional figure formed by two congruent and parallel polygon bases and connected by lateral faces that are parallelograms. And the parallelograms are usually going to be rectangles. So in this picture, for our example, the bases are pentagons, and then the lateral faces are these rectangles that connect the two pentagonal bases together. A cylinder is kind of like a prism because it has two congruent and parallel bases, but with a cylinder, the bases are always circular. And it has a curved lateral surface that connects the bases together. Because of the curved lateral surface, a cylinder does not have any edges, and it also does not have any vertices. Next up, we have a pyramid, and a pyramid is a three-dimensional figure that's formed by a polygon base and triangular lateral faces that meet at a common vertex. So notice in this example, the base is a rectangle, and then the lateral faces are triangles. And where those triangles meet, that's a common vertex. And then finally, we have a cone. A cone is a 3D figure with a circular base and a curved lateral surface that meets at a vertex. Because of that curved lateral surface, there are no edges, but there is one vertex, which is the point of the cone. So when we classify our three-dimensional figures in the next example, we're going to be naming them as either a prism, cylinder, pyramid, or cone. A cube is a special prism that has 6 square faces. Think of like a dice that you roll in a game. A dice is a cube. All other prisms and pyramids are named by the shape of their bases. So you'll notice the examples in our notes packet here. I have a triangular prism, a rectangular prism has rectangle bases, the pentagonal prism has pentagon bases, and a hexagonal prism has hexagon bases. Notice with all of the prisms, they have two bases, and then the lateral faces are parallelograms. Whereas for the pyramids in the next row, these have just one base, that's a polygon, and then it has triangular faces that meet at that common vertex. You name a pyramid again based upon the shape of its base. And this can continue, so I could have like a heptagonal pyramid or an octagonal prism. I can keep adding sides, and then when we name it, we just add that little AL at the end. So octagonal, heptagonal, decagonal, etc. So now that we have all the important vocabulary down, we're ready to look at some examples. In example 1, we're going to be classifying three-dimensional figures and then naming the vertices, edges, and bases. For the type of figure, you want to use one of the 4 types on the previous page in your 10.1 notes. So my choices are either prism, cylinder, pyramid, or cone. Notice that in figure A here, we have circular bases and a curved surface. That makes this a cylinder. So the type of figure is a cylinder. And then the bases of the cylinder are the 2 congruent and parallel circles, which are circle A and circle B. Circles you can abbreviate with the circle and the dot in the middle. So I have circle A and circle B. Now, cylinders do not have any edges because of that curved lateral face. So there's no edges or vertices. So here I'm just going to write none. The next figure in part B, you can see there's just one base right here. And then the other faces, the lateral faces, are triangles. That makes this a pyramid, and we name a pyramid and a prism based upon the shape of the base. With this being a rectangle, we would name the figure a rectangular pyramid. Pyramids have both vertices and edges. The vertices are the points where 3 or more faces come together. And you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places that are the vertices. They're the 5 points in the figure: point A, B, C, D, and E. Now the edges, there are usually going to be quite a few. This pyramid has some edges that contain that vertex where my triangles come together. So I have AB, segment AB, segment AC, segment AD, and segment AE. But don't forget that the base of the pyramid also has additional edges. So if I look at what's outlined in green there are 4 sides to my rectangle, which makes 4 additional edges that are segments. So we'll have segment BC, segment CD, segment DE, and segment EB. And the order that you write the edges doesn't matter. Also, if you flip-flop the points, so for example, BC and CB are the same segment. So that's all the same thing. And then lastly, when we name the base again is that rectangle. We name it with the word for the figure. So this is a rectangle, and then we use the vertices. So this is rectangle B, C, D, E. On the try now here, you can see that we have another pyramid, but this time our base has 5 sides. So if I look back at my vocab from the previous page, a 5-sided shape that's a pyramid is called a pentagonal pyramid. Pentagonal because the base is a pentagon, and pyramid because you have those triangular faces that come together at a common vertex. For the vertices, those are all the points. You can see there are 5 points where the faces come together along the base: A, B, C, D, and E. And then there's that common vertex where the triangular faces come together, which is F. For the edges, there are a bunch. there are all of the edges that are in the pentagon, plus all of the edges that contain that vertex F. Here's a list of all of the vertices that contain F. So these are the ones that are kind of going from the point of the pyramid down to the base. And then I also need to include the edges that are part of the pentagon, which makes 5 more edges. So in total, there are 10 edges. This is a pyramid again, which means it only has one base, and we name the base by the polygon and then the names of the vertices. This is a pentagon base, so we name it as a pentagon, and then I use the vertices A, B, C, D, E. Next, we're going to move on to some representations of three-dimensional shapes. A net is one way that we can represent a 3D figure on a 2D piece of paper. Nets are a diagram of the surfaces of a 3D figure that can be folded to form the figure. To help you identify a figure from the net, it's helpful to look at the number of bases and the shape of each face. If the shape of the face is a rectangle or parallelogram, it's going to be a prism. And if the shape of the faces are triangles, it's going to be a pyramid. So let's check out some examples. Notice that in problem A, there are 2 triangles and there are 3 rectangles. Now the 3 rectangles connect those triangles together. So I have 2 congruent triangle bases. And then the lateral faces, which is the rest of the figure, are rectangles. And if you look back at your types of figures with 2 bases and then rectangles that connect them, that makes this a prism. And because of the fact that the base is a triangle, we name it a triangular prism. So the triangle comes from the shape of the base, that's why it's triangular. And then the prism comes from the fact that there are 2 bases. In the middle figure here, notice that there's just 1 rectangle in the middle, and then the rest of the faces are triangles. Let's actually mark these sides congruent, and then I'm going to call it a square. So I have 1 square base. Also, note that the faces here are triangles. So if we folded this up, because of the triangles, it's going to become a pyramid. So those triangles are going to fold up and they're going to connect at a common vertex, making this a square pyramid. Square, again, comes from the shape of the base. And pyramid comes from the fact that there's 1 base and triangle faces. Finally, in our try now here, notice that there are 2 circles. So we have circle bases. And then there's a rectangle, which would kind of wrap around and connect the circular bases. This would form a cylinder if we fold it up. The last thing we're going to talk about here in this section is a cross-section. A cross-section is the intersection of a 3-dimensional figure and a plane. And remember that a plane is just like a flat surface. So in the picture here for example 3, part A, the plane is this orange piece, and then that plane is intersecting the 3-dimensional figure that's actually a cone. The cross-section is the overlapping of that plane and the 3-dimensional figure. So it's like where they touch each other. I'm going to kind of color in the part. The plane meets the cone right here where I shaded in blue. That's what we call the cross-section. And in this cone, The cross-section has 3 sides, so I would say the cross-section is a triangle. You'll notice in part B that we start off with the same shape. We have a cone, and we have our plane. But this time, the plane is only touching the cone at the vertex. So the cross-section is just the overlapping or the intersection of the 3-dimensional figure and the plane. So this is a point. So I would describe the cross-section as the cross-section is a point. In figure C, we switch 3D figures. Now we have a cylinder, and the plane is going through the cylinder. Look at where they overlap. Look at the shape of the cross-section. It's this shape right here, and you can see that that is a circle. Finally, for this last one, we are starting off with a pyramid, and the base of the pyramid is a pentagon. So we have a pentagonal pyramid, and you can see the cross-section is this piece right here. Notice that that shape has 5 sides, just like the base. So we would say the cross-section is a pentagon. So this ends our lesson. We started off by talking about the different parts of 3-dimensional figures and how we name them. And then we looked at nets and cross-sections. We'll continue our study of solid geometry in lesson 10.2. Thanks for watching. Bye.